week 13 or week 3 of semester 2, however you want to dissect or lump our course. So you'll notice our little, that's a little superhero friend. We're going to be, as I said, experimenting with different things, media-wise. I'm very hyper and excited for today because I will be premiering the videos that I told you I was making. So a lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into these videos, but they may not show that way. But anyway, I'll premiere them, and then I have a little poll that I've constructed just to get your feedback. Again, the idea is to make a video for maybe not every single lecture, but ideally every lecture, and to have all the videos, 2 or 3 minutes long, covering the main themes in a sort of ideally funny way, and that way you can watch a lecture video or look over your notes and then kind of see and hear me talking about some of the key issues of the week. Just another kind of way to keep you engaged in all this fun stuff. So you had your tutorials last week to help you, you have your tutorials this week. I always get confused about the dates. You had the previous tutorial to help you with assignment number 2. And now your next upcoming tutorial is designed to get you focused on assignment number 3. So we do have a test, so coming up, I'm still waiting to hear from the office about when the test will actually be. And so I've decided we're going to run some study sessions for you guys. So I will have them starting after class or in the last hour of lecture next week. So everyone should be prepared. And then I'll have extra office hours. And the SOS, the Sociology Students Association, Students of Sociology, they're going to be holding a review session. And then I'm going to try to get some extended office hours with the TAs. So I will be very available. You'll have a study session, and we'll have today a little bit at the end of the class, but tomorrow more devoted time for the test. I just finished making the test, and it is the same. I decided it's the exact same format as test 1. I was originally going to make it longer, but I decided not to. So it's 45 multiple choice questions, 8 short answer questions. In terms of cumulative, for all intents and purposes, it's not cumulative. So I decided on that as well. Although, as you'll see this week, every class draws on theories and methods and things that we learned in the culture week about norms and beliefs, and in the socialization week, we'll see a lot of that today. So if you do just study the chapters between test 1 and next week, our theme this week and next week, you'll be fine. But please do make sure you're paying attention to the parts of the chapters that talk about theory and methods. I have 3 or 4 only multiple choice questions that are devoted kind of purely to theory and methods, but they're things that I keep saying kind of over and over again, and that I think should be sticking points of the class. So again, we'll see how things go, but I am going to, I decided to have the tutorials devoted to assignment 3 rather than test 2. You can ask questions about material during it. You'll have some extra time, but I just want to make sure we get started on assignment 3 sooner than later because, as I said last week, you have to do interviews with people, and you have to kind of, get started on that sooner than later, just so you can, look at all your notes, assemble your ideas, and really make a paper that ideally, I'll tell you this later today when I give out the instructions, but create a paper that hopefully you can try to present at undergrad research day. So that's something I'm very involved with as the instructor of this course, and so I'll tell you more about that later, but please, write the paper thinking, this could be something I present. Kind of the first thing in university that I show others. And I'm happy to review your submissions and get you geared towards doing that. Okay, so that said, in terms of me talking about that, this week we are covering our second last substantive week before the test. One last little technical thing. I apologize if any of you couldn't have briefly seen your grades on Revel. They got back right away, so everything's all hunky-dory again. So I'm happy about that. Sorry, I'm hearing talking. Okay, all right, so we now are on education. So this was something we discussed quite a bit in the first half of the term, in the socialization week, again, and also in the families week. Remember, we talked about the lives of young children, adolescents, university students, older adults, and we saw the family and the education system as, along with the media, as kind of the central institutions that shape who we are, who we become, what we want to do, what we think we have to do. Again, you're going to see so many prior weeks fitting in this week. Gender, culture, socialization, to name a few, and inequality. So this week we focus on this place and the places you've been in the past, your primary school, secondary school, and we really try to narrow in on how, as sociologically minded individuals, how do we analyze this massive entity. So the first way that sociologists try to analyze this, again, what we learned in our 2 theory weeks is that anytime you look at something, you're implicitly theorizing. And theorizing involves dissecting a category. So seeing, okay, I'm looking at education. What does that mean, first of all? So you create and then you kind of dissect. Remember the binaries. So it's the institution that, as we all know, is responsible for giving us knowledge. We kind of knew that before we took the class. But as we discussed in the socialization and family weeks, it's also responsible for teaching us a whole lot of informal things. Codes of conduct, codes of behavior, like acceptable things you can do. It may be in, let's say you don't have any siblings, or you don't have, very disciplinary parents. It may be in school that you learn for the first time not to, steal toys from other children or bully, and then that kind of evolves throughout your education in terms of things that are tabooed or sanctioned, things you can and can't do with other people. We'll be focusing a lot this week on how those things you learn, aside from just the formal education that you get. Again, in Canada, for example, it's mandatory to attend primary and secondary school, or at least until age 16. Again, I formally dropped out of school before returning at age 20, but I dropped out before I ever went to high school because I repeated grade 9 in a middle school twice due to my truancy. But what was formally legislated was that I had to be attending day school until age 16. And the idea was that I would be, finishing at least with a grade 10 education. Meanwhile, I had grade 8. Okay, so formal and informal education. So again, we'll see that when we're analyzing the education system, we're looking at ideals. And we're looking at again, when you just think of school, you may only be thinking about those formal ideals and what it is that schools are supposed to do, again, knowledge transmission. But we will see this week that school offers us a heck of a lot more. And again, today, embedding myself into your learning, I'm going to see, I will, with the things that I present you today, I'm going to try to have this course really creep into your psyches in a way that maybe school hasn't before. That's my lofty goal. That's my formal goal. Let's see if it actually works, or if I'm just, on my own plane. And it's funny. The bandit returned this, but it's broken, and they stole the one that's working. So I don't know. You know, it's fun. It keeps things interesting, right? Okay. So a little bit of history. This won't be a super history-rich class. Again, as I said, this course is front-loaded. Now that we know our stuff, we masters of the Industrial Revolution and Canadian history and all of that, we can kind of just jump into all these nice little pockets of society and how, trying to again think of that backdrop of what was going on 100 years ago, roughly. Urbanization, people happily and sometimes very upsettily leaving rural areas, industry and innovation, but also major poverty and degradation, gender segregation, but also some people liking the new norms. A big tumultuous time. So going back to Durkheim, you'll see the theories here all are really important to kind of understand what education, what's at the key of education. So this was a time of massive social change, people moving around, people being wrenched out of their environments, people happy to move, again, lots of diversity. And education here was prompted by this flow of people. So immigration, again, we covered the last couple of weeks. There were lots of Chinese immigrants, Italian immigrants, and people from all around the world in the late, like 1860 to 1920, coming in to build railroads, houses, infrastructure, all sorts of stuff. And the quote-unquote Canadian population, people that had kind of already been there, and settlers from Britain and so on. All of this movement necessitated not just the teaching of formal vocational skills to do those jobs, but also, and you see this quite clearly and horrifically in the case of residential schools, but also values and norms of what it meant to be kind of quote-unquote Canadian at the time. So as we'll see this week, school always had this double function, at least in Canada, of formal and informal teaching. Again, in this class, formally I'm teaching you SOCIO03 and to develop sociological imaginations, but I'm also informally trying to teach you how to be, awesome students and open-minded people, and a little bit odd and all these things. And to embrace that part of yourself. So this is, again, formal and informal. Always think when you're being taught something, what's a bigger message that I'm being taught in this? Or what's something kind of hidden? Remember the idea of the hidden curriculum that we talked about. We'll talk about this week as well. So education was not only key to economic development. Again, people needed training for jobs that they were going to go into. So if doctors, it doesn't even have to be the super high-paid prestige ones, like doctors and lawyers, but it could even be more relatively mundane, everyday kind of tasks, like plumbers. It's not everyday mundane, it's highly skilled as well, but viewed by society, things like plumbers, store attendants, accountants, a whole range. Everything that you just think is needed in society to make things kind of tick. So not only was it necessary to economic development, and not only did this favor or was almost exclusively the domain of boys over girls, or men over women ultimately, as remember, as I said, labor, as I'm sure you just know from talking to your parents, older individuals, the media, and so on, these sorts of vocational schoolings were limited to boys and men. Girls and women would often attend these institutions at the primary level, but then kind of taper out at the secondary level, or enter into kind of girls' school or women's college, which was geared towards domestic duties. So they would, rather than taking economics, they would take literally home economics. That's where that kind of came from. And then, and the idea was to be a stay-at-home wife who was really kind of managing the household. So again, a lot of these norms that we take for granted now, both good and bad, things that we're trying to change, things that we may like, these come from this sort of foundational moment. So I mentioned before the atrocious example of this kind of informal aspect of education that really captures both sides. really well is the case of residential schools. So these historically have been seen as very trauma-filled institutions where indigenous individuals, so people who were indigenous, native to Canada, upon colonization, so people from the West coming in and you know, taking over the land, kind of gutting it, building new institutions, taking things over, kind of implanting a new culture. Residential schools were designed to not only teach indigenous individuals the same sorts of formal vocations, so accounting, lawyer, doctor, pharmacist, whatever, not just teach those things, not math and English and things you take in primary school and secondary school and beyond, but to Canadianize them, to try to teach them that their cultures, their previous cultures, were inferior to Western culture, and to be happy to embrace the, you know, quote-unquote modern way of life. So that's, again, a kind of strong, atrocious example of this process. But you can think, again, whenever someone's teaching you something, when your parents are raising you a certain way, when they're, you know, when they're telling you not to do something, what's the literal thing that they're telling you to do, and then what's the broader message? You know, I think oftentimes people, parents and children in particular, butt heads over kind of, you know, what's the point of me like learning, like you know, doing the dishes once a week or cleaning the room? Can't we just hire someone, or can't we just use paper plates or whatever? But it's part of a deeper message a lot of the time of, you know, building responsibility and being accountable and things like that. So two sides. Okay. So again, that's the broad kind of history, and again, that's the kind of major overarching theoretical component of this week. We'll talk about how the major schools of theories explain this very differently, because this is a topic, again, that's very loaded. You know, education is something in, you know, the information age, the knowledge economy, all these things that characterize the contemporary times. It's absolutely key, and, you know, as human species with rational thought and everything, learning is fantastic, but at the same time, it's so bound up and generative of many forms of inequality. So it really lends itself to theorizing from manifold ways, from multiple directions. As society matures, and and by matures I just mean, I don't mean in a necessarily a developmental way, but as society becomes increasingly complex, we see that education becomes both more specialized and hierarchical, but also more diverse. So I told you before about this excellent program that I actually would, if they had it, well, I could take it, but it was full. But if they have this Sunday class at George Brown, I believe, called Therapeutic Clowning, and I think that would be fun. It would probably help my lecturing. I would, it's about embracing your empathic side. And it's, it's nice. Then I could go to hospitals and stuff and like talk to little kids and cancer fighters and stuff like that, and try to get them to see the world differently and stuff, and they'd be fun. But anyway, that is one example of a niche occupation that wouldn't be even thought of 100 years ago. So you can imagine maybe in another 100 years, there would be a course on I don't even know. It's so hard when you're trying to predict the future, because we probably won't even have smartphones anymore. We'll just be plugged in automatically. But something funny would exist. Maybe Facebook mentors or whatever. It would be something where they could avatar mentors. People saying how to craft your best cyborg self or something. Selfie masters and stuff. But anyway, so not only are primary and secondary education ideally mandatory. Again, it's kind of cut off at age 16. Who knows how that may change? But the idea is that everyone will kind of do primary and secondary school, and it's been that way essentially from school's institution, although that's a more recent development. But we've seen what's called the massification of education. And so just as a note, when we say higher education, we usually mean higher education and post-secondary usually mean the same thing. So we have primary, which is elementary, secondary, which is high school, and then post-secondary / higher, which is college, university, vocational programs, like those French, TGEP or whatever they're called, the French versions of those in Quebec. All of those are kind of higher. So the entrenchment or institutionalization of education at the primary and secondary levels, were part of the process of industrialization as more and more people became highly skilled, more knowledgeable, smarter, for lack of a better word. People were increasingly becoming more industrious, new technologies were emerging, and then to teach how to use those new technologies, new forms of healthcare, new innovations, more education programs were developed. So things like computer coding, everything in the tech and internet industries, those are all quite new, and newer and newer programs keep being developed. So this is part of a process of massification. Again, not only that these programs are so diffuse and wide, and there's so many of them, but that it's kind of all expected that we find our niche within one of those things. Again, even it could be highly skilled trades like plumbing and electrical work. The short story of this is that, yes, 100 years ago, you may have been lucky to have finished high school if you were growing up somewhere that was still relatively rural, like let's say somewhere in the periphery of the GTA. High school was very rigorous at that time. It still is now, but I mean relative people in the community. And that may be enough. That may have been enough to kind of set you off, starting your own business, working in a version of an office job. But today, now that education and specialized education are such mainstays, and people don't work as often in factories and kind of in physical jobs. Less and less proportion of the population is taking on those jobs, or are taking on those jobs. And we're in this information age where people work, in social interactive jobs like healthcare, teaching, and high-tech jobs that need specialized skills. A high school diploma just doesn't mean very much. And again, the position I was in when I had 2 high school credits at age 20, I was quite, at least in my own mind, maybe, if I had really high confidence, I could have lied about my credentials or whatever. But in my mind, I felt extremely limited. So again, I worked at Krispy Kreme and then a bakery, and then I was like in a part-time security company. And I kind of felt, I was very ashamed, and it was hard for me to think. Like, I can't do any sort of skilled job. I have no skills. I don't know what I'm doing. I still don't really think I have any skills, but now I have these, these credentials and things. So, so yay, credentialization for me. But again, the two are not always completely directly correlated, right? You can have no education or very little and be highly proficient. As I told you, Google now, so everything I teach, you have to take things, society's changing. Companies like Google, as I said, now do tests more based on coding proficiency than actually looking at people's credentials. So when things go up, they come down. Yep, Nora.
If as post-secondary became more common, high school kind of went out of fashion, won't a bachelor's degree and then won't it just keep going, and so more and more education will become kind of outdated?
Great question. So that was the fear. So what Nora said, many people, sociologists included, are highly, so I challenge you for this and to think through these things. And great question. So the risk, sociologically speaking, is that we will just have endless credentials. Now, theoretically, you could think, okay, well, and this is why it's important to think, think beyond just history sometimes. So humans are industrious beings, right? And so education, you could think, okay, so first it was just primary, then it was primary, secondary, now it's primary, secondary, post-secondary, then it's like post-secondary times 2 with masters, then with PhDs, then people, like people I know, then taking specialized things after PhDs, like myself, that might end up doing an MBA, but, yeah, it would just go on forever. But companies like Google and many other companies now are starting to say, okay, this is kind of wonky. People are staying in school for so long, and how much of that time is actually generative of skills? So there's one thing to say, okay, I'm in school, I'm a sponge, I'm learning, I'm amazing, which you all should be saying. But another is, okay, like, and not to get, you know, too like money focused or production focused, but you kind of have to ask yourself sometimes, like Google asks, how much of this input is actually like able to come back out of me? Like to what extent, like how much should I be learning versus how much should I be doing? So companies ask this, long-winded way of saying this. This is what my current research has been much more on this, on careers and jobs and skill sets. Many industrious people have been very critical of the turn to massive credentialization, saying a lot of people, because now university is such a mainstay and we're forcing it on everyone, they're being critical of saying, actually, you know, people that aren't that educated are sometimes a lot better at the same jobs. And it really comes down to more people getting, you know, appropriate experience, finding an industry that fits them, interning, shadowing people. So there has been a turn back towards that. So great question though. And again, always think when you're learning these things in class, learning about trends, think, and that's something I ask as a sociologist is, you know, to what extent is this trend kind of causally independent of like human agency? So people resist this, many people on many levels. So, you know, things like boosting the minimum wage, changing the values of different jobs, you know, looking at gender segregated jobs, asking why, say, teaching is paid less than a lot of financial jobs. People are very critical of these sorts of trends, you know, for reasons that a lot of the time are kind of empirically valid. So as you see here, so this is people over age 25. So very important when you're doing quantitative work. You know, you can't, it wouldn't really be fair to ask people under age 20 or so what their education is, because the expectation would be that they're not in university yet. So this is a sample kind of just of people over age 25. And you see now, there's a lot of people, what I found most interesting about this is there's about equal amounts of people that have university, because you could lump graduate and bachelor's together. But there's about as many people that have college or, you know, some version of university, but either of those are twice as likely as having just high school. And then if you combine those numbers, basically 80% of people have either a college diploma or one or more university degrees. So the story, as the student said, it does appear quite linear. It's interesting sociologically to think, again, there are people, coding is the one I would look at, so mark my word on this. I'm not a prophet, but maybe in 20 years, or even 10 years, I do think, you know, whatever coding becomes and turns into in the future, coding is something you can totally teach yourself at home, and there are many stories of people that do that. Maybe like cryptocurrency traders and mobile app developers and things like that. As technology gets more sophisticated, you don't need some bozo like me telling you how to do things and showing you little demos when I don't even know what I'm doing. You can just stay at home and do that, and you can like take selfies and grind her around and whatever. So that, you know, that could be in the future. So anyway, credential inflation. So speaking exactly to that point. So we have these rising rates of mandatory education and then kind of normatively mandatory education. You know, go to school, what are you doing? All the pressure I felt to kind of keep going back to school. This credential inflation, again, it's not, you know, people often complain, you know, why do I need to go to school? Why do I need a degree? I certainly felt that way. But at the same time, you know, for most jobs that you would want, you probably need some requisite skills that you may not have. So again, using kind of strong examples of things like nurses, doctors, social workers. There's a lot of things you need to know before you can do these. And when you look at job applications, this means right off the bat, not only are you selecting for who you imagine appropriate people to be, so someone who works, so even if it's not like one of those big professional jobs, let's say you are the owner of a business and you say, I want people who are very quick-witted, get along with others, and have like a keen business sense, because I want them to kind of be not just cashiers at my store, but also kind of pushing sales gently when they can, and taking opportunities as they come up. So I'm going to hire people that have like BComs, so Bachelor of Commerce, or BBAs, Bachelor of Business Administration, or more, MBAs, and PhDs and whatever, although they probably wouldn't take the job. But I'm going to limit myself to that because statistically or whatever, I think that people with those degrees are more likely to have those skills. So this is where people become critical of education and say, does getting that degree really mean you can do those things, A? And then B, do you really need that degree to do those things? Can't you learn it some other way? Why have we trusted the institution with that? Again, those are questions I say, remember this, as time goes on, more and more of that will become a dominant kind of, maybe not protest, but people sharing that on social media and stuff. It's already kind of been happening the last few years. So the issue with this, again, raising to Nora's point, the issue with this is not just, okay, do you need school for those skills, but employers are legally allowed to continually ask for more and more prerequisite skills in the form of education. So, it's very much a norm now for people to ask for university degrees. And this is where things become problematic, because if you look at the previous slide, right, so almost, or just about 60% of the population over age 25 don't have university degrees. But increasingly, having a university degree is mandatory for pretty well any job other than skilled trades that pay more than like 40 grand a year. So university for most people, unless they're super good with their hands or athletes or whatever, or pro gamers, not jaded pro gamers like me, but actually better. For most of us, you kind of have to go to university if you want to build the life you want. And then the fear is quite real that this will keep growing and growing and growing, and you will be told, oh, you only have, a PhD. That's useless because now we have, a ZHD or whatever, and you're only at P, like you're like 10 degrees behind. And so, anyway, so this could keep going up. Again, I think that's why it's so important for people to think sociologically and say, no, you're treating this like this is a personal issue and I'm underqualified, but this is a societal level problem and we're in credentialization and stuff. And then they'll kick you out of the office. But if enough of you do that and enough of you get kicked out of offices and then you post selfies on Twitter or whatever, then it'll become something. Okay, so I've tried to give you a bunch of these ideas, keeping it a bit light, but remember, like, funny or whatever, try hard funny. But this is a very important topic, and I'm very interested, again, in tapping into the pulse of the class and what you all think. So for study buddy activity number 1, imagine that you and your study buddy were asked to write a proposal for de-credentializing the workforce. So I've said these things, but I have my little imagination of how this works, but I want to know how you think this would actually work. So in other words, you are asked to remove educational requirements for as many jobs as you could. Now the challenge of this is, I think for most jobs, we don't just think people are a bunch of bureaucrats sitting around with no skills. Again, I sometimes think of myself that way here, but I know, like I've learned things and I know how to do things sometimes when I'm in a good mood. So try to think, be fair to the occupations themselves, and to do so, ask these sorts of questions. How would you begin to select areas of education that are not required for specific occupations? So could you take education away from, because I gave the example of coders, but what other jobs could you think of that maybe require certain education but maybe don't need that? How would you ensure that job candidates have the required skills? Remember, put yourself in the position of the employer. If there were no credentials, how would you test people's skills? Can you always test people's skills, like interpersonal skills and things like that in the same way? For some things you can, for others it might be more challenging in terms of specific skill sets. And what would the role of the university and other educational institutions be in this new economy? So remember, we have all these higher education institutions. Would I just be like, tough luck, Lawrence, or what would happen to me? Would there be any value to the university? And this is something I'm trying. I think most profs will try to instill in you that you should be viewing higher education as as an end in itself, as a valuable thing. But is it really valuable if you take it away from the market? For some people, yes. For some people, no. So discuss for 5 to 10 minutes and we'll regroup. And I'm really excited to hear your thoughts and particularly to see what kind of jobs and strategies you come up with. I'd like to share with me. Okay, so you can answer anything, but how about we start? So what areas of the work world did you come up with that maybe now require credentials but you think may not need them in as formal of a way? Anybody? Yep.
Laboring jobs that require less skill, just someone there to do it, like cleaners and things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so some of those don't really require them that much now, but yes, I think they do. Those could be, maybe more on-the-job training for a lot of those ones that do require. That would make sense. Okay, so more kind of physical jobs. Anything else? Yep. Yeah, that's a great example. I make a mean Manhattan, and I don't have any mixology training, so I could do that. But no, I'd have to lie or something. And then Smart Serve. I took Smart Serve. I just gotta click through everything, and then I got some questions wrong. But things like that. It's fun. Do I need that? It's kind of like they're like the low-hanging fruit, just to make sure that someone. is taking it seriously. A lot of times education feels that way. It's like, okay, I'm proving to you that I'm serious about this, so I took this course, or I jumped through these hoops, right? Okay, so let's say we removed things. We could use the case of bartending. How would you make sure people have the requisite skills? Or in any other example, if you got rid of the credentials, so remember, we say, okay, I assume people with this certificate can do a pretty good job because they went to a good school, they took a good program. Now that that's gone, how can I hire? What would I do? Yep.
Well, I know places like Ford right now, what they do is they don't really look at your specific mechanics degree or anything like that. They have their own boot camps where they train you specifically to make sure you're able to do the job and work with what they want and require for their specific vehicles. Mm-hmm. Something along those lines of like just employer training.
Yeah, so that's a great point. So the student in the front, what many companies are doing, so it's not that, okay, if you get rid of credentials, it's not that now you're going to have people that are totally uneducated in the world, but the idea would be more apprenticeship, organization-specific learning. So companies like Google too, they want to know that you can code, but basically they lower the entry barriers, and then once you're in, the barriers are still quite high for a company like Google, but they lower the credential part, and because they say, okay, well, You're not learning how to work at Google or at Apple or whatever my company is when you're in school. So it makes more sense to say, okay, let's kind of use different criteria, so more like cultural fit, not in the way culture we talked about in this class, not like around ethnicity or anything like that, but work culture, more cultural fit, more the kinds of experiences you've had, the kind of, let's say you've made certain apps, anything like that, and then all the more specific stuff that we used to maybe think school taught you, we would now teach you that on the job. Some places have even started their own universities. So there is a hamburger university for McDonald's. I wanted to go there, that would be fun. I'm serious, I want to go there. But it's for people that want to move up their management train. That would be really awesome. We'll talk about, I use McDonald's on purpose because we talk about the McDonaldization of education and university. And then lastly, okay, so this is the most interesting one. You guys must have opinions on this. What would the role of the university specifically be? Let's say we reached a point where you didn't actually need university for jobs anymore. So it was kind of like what it was when it first came out. An ancient civilization where there was like the first universities. They were more designed just to, have people thinking very elaborate thoughts and speaking eloquently and all of that. Now that that's not hip anymore, what do you think the role of universities would be in this new sort of like employer-trained economy? Yep.
Networking and making connections and gaining reference.
That's a great observation. So maybe university could actually be more about networking. Are there any programs where you think right now that's already a big thing? So I'm kind of priming you for post-BA or upper years. Are there any programs you can kind of think of where maybe networking is a major component of why people go? Anybody? Management, yeah. Exactly. So MBAs with, and management schools, it's not about the content necessarily, it's about the people you meet. So, that management stuff you'll see in my video very much inspires me because that's my research mostly. But the whole idea of having, study buddies in this class, even if you think, Sociology, more like garbage 101, at least I'm making networks with lifelong friends, and maybe if they're confused and whatever, then I can, they'll be my soundboard at least, or they could be my LinkedIn connection or whatever. So at least you'll get that. So that's why I say, maybe you don't take this, but you at least have your study buddy, and your Facebook chat group and whatever, and then that you can take. So again, I'm trying not to be hypocritical in saying that, formal education's losing value. And also, again, for me personally, formal education completely caused me to turn my life around. So I took a lot of advantage of opportunities that were given to me at this time. I wasn't always cognizant at all. I was very afraid to take networking opportunities and things like that. But I know this is a bit of a detour, but since I brought it up, I do strongly encourage everyone to take advantage of things, to use things that are on campus, and really to build lots of friendships. Because I only made like 2 friends in undergrad, and I isolated myself. So don't do that. Yep.
I also feel like, how before when it was sort of elite thing that only a few people could actually afford it, it might kind of go back to that if no one's going to university and only a few people are going, so they might kind of get another sense aside from like other people.
Yeah. So if, and again, like this is hypothetical, but the university, again, when I go to faculty meetings and stuff, enrollment and all of that, these are growing concerns in universities as people move away. And so as Nora said, the university runs the risk of becoming irrelevant to jobs, and that could either lead it to become kind of a thing of the past as people just take lectures online, or like imagine as technology gets better and you have like VR software, so you can learn trades at home, you can do simulations, you could like do demos. So let's say for call centers, you could, you know, they already do that. They're called realistic job previews. But you could take calls from home. You could pretend you're in an office and do it from there. And you can do really like interactive training sessions. The university will have to keep up. And either it could become very like high intellectual and elite, or it could try to, you know, really gain a competitive advantage and say, no, we're super practical, but we're developing thought leaders, not just like, and you know, people need discipline. That's a huge thing that the education system, the informal part of it, remember, again, using the atrocious example of the indigenous school and all the violence that happened there, one of the major impetuses for that school was to kind of force people to act a certain way. So education has that function too. It enables people, but it's also about molding their behavior. So, you know, kind of like parenting. They're very, very similar sociologically institutions. Okay, so that was great. We'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll resume, and then we're 10 minutes closer to the big reveal. So hopefully everyone stays, and I'll be showing you two private YouTube videos, and then if they don't traumatize you, then I will post, I'll make it public, and then you can subscribe to me on YouTube. So that'll be fun. Trust me. I ran it by my TAs. They liked it. So we'll see. Okay, so I'll see you in 10 minutes. Now we move on to theoretical approaches. So the first one we'll talk about is functionalism. You may see my little Parsons hat. It says Parsons. How did he get a Parsons hat? Did he go to did he go on Etsy and like hire someone? No. There's actually a brewery in Prince Edward County, just kind of east of here. It's called Parsons Brewery. It's a lot of fun. I'm not advocating drinking, and so don't drink and do sociology. Okay, so functionalism, Mr. Parsons, again, remember he was kind of the contemporary Durkheim. And so before getting into this, again, remember the educational system broadly, if you look at it in the three classical schools of functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism, it involves kind of that thought process of saying, okay, before we start grinding our gears, let's ask ourselves, okay, idealistically, what good does education do? Why did it originate? Then you move on to, okay, what are some problems with it? What has it reinforced accidentally? What were some of its like latent functions that were not so great? And then lastly, okay, like how do people make sense of it now? So Parsons, starting on that kind of first train of thought, and again, you don't have to think that way. Your first reaction could be, you know, thinking about how people make sense of it, or that it's like really awful. That's fine, but this is just kind of how most, I think, sociologists, or the arc of sociology frames things. So Parsons, again, said, schools basically are key to, and the education system are key to making society flow. They're you know, what keeps us ticking and moving along in the way that we want to be moving along. So they serve and reflect the values and interests of the broader society they're in. So those can be economic. So if there are, you know, a whole slew, mass amounts of tech jobs opening up. You may see colleges increasing their enrollments, like their enrollment caps, hiring more tech-savvy professors, and maybe having more tech classes in high school. So for example, you know, high schools, I'm not sure exactly when, but they started having, you know, things like PowerPoint, like teaching PowerPoint and typing in school. You know, roughly around the time that computers were becoming more mainstream. Those were increasing in the 80s, 90s, and then now even more, you know, to the point where many schools use Chromebooks. And you know, I'm always amazed at how much more tech savvy students are than me, like using things like Google Docs, which I didn't even start using Google Docs instead of Word for my personal notes until like 3 months ago. So I was like, this is in the cloud, it's gonna disappear. And then I realized, and I just realized the other day that my phones, that my pictures are like going into my, my Google account. I didn't even know my Google account was on when I had Chrome. But I only know that from making my YouTube account. So, you know, these are things I don't even know. So that's what I'm saying. I'm just like blowing my mind. I don't even know what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years. But so anyway, all of these new things we're having in education, ideally, from a functionalist perspective, are reflecting our wider values. So school maintains the equilibrium of the social system. So remember Durkheim, long ago, reflecting on the French Revolution, talking about things like anomie and like people feeling normalists and stuff. He said, okay, we have jobs, but the problem is that people often like get stuck in their roles and they don't see how they're connected to other people. So one of the grand ideas behind education, you may have heard the expression, having a liberal education, it's kind of giving people the quote-unquote critical thinking capacities to see themselves as like part of a wider society. So again, that's something that's key to formal education. You know, teaching people history so they know what's going on in the world so that they can, you know, relativize things, teaching them geography and public, like foreign affairs, teaching them math and science, just so they have a well-rounded way of approaching the world. And then again, socialization is key here for functionalists too. And this is really important. This is, I think, often when people get really hard on, you know, the system or the man or whatever they call it, one function that the school plays is actually a safeguard for very underprivileged people. So even though, as we'll see, underprivileged individuals are continually kind of marginalized in education, education may be the only thing that someone, say, in a very abusive household or living with neglect, it may be their kind of, their real thing that they have. You know, they may flee the home for school, they may make relationships with teachers and friends. So socialization may be, you know, it could be, yes, on the one hand, reinforcing gender norms and forcing people to go to school and credentialization and all of that. But for many other people, it may be a socialization that they like desperately want and need. And again, for me, it was, you know, going back to school, I can only sing praises about Yorkdale Adult Learning Center, which kind of helped me see like, oh, I actually have abilities to do things, and I can be friends with people, you know, that aren't just gamers and donut makers and things. I can broaden myself. So that's the functionalist perspective again. You know, it's that organic metaphor, seeing all the institutions fitting together around what Durkheim called that collective consciousness. So again, it really, you know, conflict theorists criticize it for saying, you know, no, people are different and it's not just one view. But I think one of the key things it captures is, you know, the education system, at least ideally, is supposed to give people more awareness of the context they're living in and see how they may relate with people that have very different skill sets and very different backgrounds. So conflict theory though, so once so even if you agree with the functionalist perspective, yes, it socializes people. Yes, that can be hugely key for some people. The question or observation kind of immediately comes up of saying, well, you know, has this worked out as planned? Have there been, you know, Merton talks about latent functions saying like, yeah, the manifest function of the school is to give people job training and specific knowledge, and then it has this great latent function of socializing people and like helping them build networks. Conflict theory says, okay, well, both the manifest and latent functions are actually quite bad in a lot of ways. So the manifest function really of education could just be to like bolster the upper class or the 1%. So education programs, yes, they're made to give people job training, but who's taking those programs? People who, as Marx would say, are free laborers. People who are taught that, like, you know, being an entrepreneur is very risky. You should take a professional program, do something like be a doctor, a lawyer, a nurse, pharmacist, whatever. All in all, work for someone else. Don't like radicalize yourself. Don't go against the status quo. You know, those are a lot of criticisms. So here it says to maintain capitalist profit and kind of keep yourself compliant, not questioning the system. And so people who studied this, Bowles and Gintis, they talked about, and I've mentioned this several different lectures talking about higher education. My idea of that was informed by this 1976 piece, which is still relevant. So they talk about the relationship between the education system and the economy, and specifically schools, so like U of T and your high schools and primary schools, and the workplace. They conceptualize that under the term the Correspondence Principle. So this is twofold. So the things that you learn in school, you know, they're not just arbitrary, but the vast majority of them are geared towards specific skills that you need in a variety of occupations. So even, you know, the way we assess students is very similar, you'll see, to how, or many of you already know, it's very similar to how employers assess employees. So good performance in class, you know, is, you know, getting A's, B's, whatever. Workplaces do that sort of social sorting as well. So they will, you know, they give people promotions and incentives, and they keep you around, and you know, give you extra perks and bonuses based on how well you perform. Similarly, in university, you know, you're encouraged to try to make the dean's list, to graduate with honors, and there is a matching effect. So students that do better then can kind of put those items on their CV. Students that have research opportunities, students that, you know, as I encourage you all to do, take advantage of resources here. Take advantage is the wrong term, but utilize resources here, and because again, everything you're doing here ideally should correspond with what you want to do in the market, in the quote-unquote real world. So this correspondence, again, in an ideal world, you'd say, okay, great, I'm Bobby Joe, and I'm going to go to U of T, and I'm going to take you know, I'm looking at Bowles and Gintis, 1976, and I'm going to take management, and then leadership course, and then sociology of conflict studies, and then whatever, and it's all going to correspond with the exact job I want. Or I'm going to take med school, and then I'm going to get this job. That works, you know, for people that can do that, and for people that know how to do that, and can do that easily. But this exacerbates the inequality that pre-existed those sorts of thoughts. So if you are, say, a single parent, if you have dependents, so remember, aside from your children, so last class we talked about the extended family. If you are taking care of your grandparents, if you're working multiple jobs, which many of you are, to support your education, this makes this kind of selection process more difficult for you. And conversely, it makes that process easier for someone with more resources. So we'll talk about it a bit later, but you know, there's a strong correlation in many professions, one of which is medical doctors, that you're much more likely to get into med school if your parents, if one or more of your parents or guardians were doctors. And the reason for that is, you know, you're kind of taught ahead of time, you know, which courses you should be focusing on, what you should be doing in extracurriculars, how you should be framing yourself as an applicant, all these sorts of intangible things. So even though school may provide, theoretically, anyone with the ability to do a correspondence matrix, certain people are much more likely and able to do that than others. So again, conflict theory is always kind of seen as a response to that functional perspective, a functionalist perspective of saying, yes, there's a lot of like nice things, but maybe you're seeing it with slightly rose-colored glasses. This actually plays out quite differently for certain people. So an example of this too, of some of the the negatives, tuition rates. So tuition rates in the last 27 years have gone up 280%, and they continue to go up. So just, can anyone tell me what's the current tuition at UTSC for like a first year arts student, roughly? 9,000? 8,000? 8 to 10? Higher even? Oh yeah, well, it depends on your program. If you're taking like 400 courses like Sarah. But yeah, so when I was an undergrad, I remember it was like, I started in 2009. I think it was 7,100. And then now in grad school, which is pretty much, I think my grad school started at 8,200 and is now 8,800. So it's going up quite a bit. So again, the average in 2012 to 13 was 5,600. So it's increasingly, like a lot of things, it's precipitously. When you hear that, it means like raining, precipitation, lots of stuff. It's going up quite a bit. So from roughly 6,000 to 9,000, so 50% in the last 6 years. So who knows what that'll be going forward. And we're in a place where taxpayers, not for international students who pay triple or quadruple that amount, but for domestic students, this is largely tax subsidized. In America, in many parts of America at least, certain states are more subsidized than others, you could be paying 20, 30, 40,000 a year. And on average, graduate programs, as you all know, when you're looking at, again, grad school is different. Grad school is different from professional grad school. So the tuition rates for someone like me are much closer to what you pay, but med school and law school are like 20 grand plus in Ontario, and going up quite a bit per year. So again, thinking of the economic factor, so yes, education is designed to boost everybody's odds and reduce. Remember, the Industrial Revolution was saying, no, you feudal lords, you're not going to have everything, because we're people of industry. We're the bourgeois, and we separated ourselves from that. We're not run by like divine right and feudal ownership. We're industrious. We're starting businesses, and anyone can do this. So entrepreneurship went up. People have new jobs, and all of this. But again, social class plays a role in how much someone can participate in that. So if you're, if you don't have the money to do this and you can't afford to take on the loans, or you're not given the loans, so let's say you're trying to do this later in life, you can't get the funding, this, again, kind of is a way, it's called the Matthew effect, when you hear the rich get richer. The Matthew effect means, once something positive's happened to a person, that just keeps going on at a higher rate. So for here, people that already had wealth, they then can attain wealth more easily through education than someone who, say, maybe the first one in their family going to school, or is supporting someone else on debt, or is in debt themselves. So in a way, it leads to the poor getting poorer or stagnating, and the rich getting richer. It doesn't do that. The education doesn't make people poorer, but in an extreme case, if it wasn't, that's why there's lots of political debates about to what extent it should be funded, because we're always trying to make sure that we're not actually making problems worse. For some people it can, but again, that would be a separate issue. So again, tuition rates, as you see, continuously go up over time, and they've been going up more quickly over time as well. So, just something to think about. So again, functionalism and conflict theory. First, yes, keeps the organism alive. Second, okay, it's keeping it alive, but, how's it living? Are things really going well? And what's it? Is it everyone the same? As we'll see when we get to gender, there are many entrenched divisions. So symbolic interactionism. So it looks at how these sorts of processes play out. So in terms of education, one key concept that's developed, also by Merton and Becker, Howard Becker uses it, but many people use this term in sociology called the self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's kind of related to the Matthew effect that I talked about, but it talks about how it happens from a more identity perspective. So here they say that in school you're kind of taught how you should be interacting, how intelligent you are, what kind of jobs you can do. So for example, in secondary school you may take a career aptitude test, and you may find out through that test, just show of hands, has anyone taken one of those tests? Kind of a vocational inventory test of what you should be. So few, so you're all totally clueless. Some of you. What were you told to be?
Well, like I've taken like a few, but one thing I did for like to determine a co-op placement, it was completely wrong. I don't like kids very much. I'm just gonna put that out there. And I was told I should go into like a sector that is like child care, like educational stuff.
And what did they base that off of? What kind of things were you asked, roughly? Or just a whole bunch of questions,
It was
or?
like, yeah, it was a bunch of stuff.
Mm-hmm. So that's an example. So yes. So anyway, so through things like aptitude tests, students are, they learn early on, or young people learn early on, okay, these are the sorts of jobs in the world, these are the sorts of skills that are valuable. If your teacher speaks to you really kindly, treats you like a precocious kind of engaged student, that may cause you to label yourself as a good student. Remember the looking glass self. Regardless of what you thought of yourself, the way you're treated in school may cause you to then embark on a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you say, okay, teachers treat me really well. They tell me I should go to university. They tell me I should major in math. I'm really good at it. You self-impose that label, you internalize it, and then you go and do that. Conversely, if you're a student that's seen as problematic, or teachers just continually disregard you, you may then say, school's not for me. Teachers kind of think I'm not performing well, I don't get good grades, or when I do, I'm not really given much credit, or they, and so sociologists that look at that take this example, what they're interested in is, okay, we know all these statistical trends, so say that women are less likely to enter the tech industry, minority individuals end up earning less money and often get less education, or when they do get the amount of education similar, but then they often occupy less prestigious roles and earn less money. The symbolic interactionists are saying, okay, how does this process unfold? So how does this impact people's like their identities and what they think of themselves vocationally and intellectually, and then B, like how does that lead them to make different post-secondary choices and market choices? So again, symbolic interactionism is always much more practical, but at the same time micro and individual. It's not just for random sake saying what do you think about this, but it's always about, okay, we know the trend, how does the trend operate? So for example, in my own work, where I interviewed people that got stuck in low-wage jobs, I knew the trends. I knew that people with less education, women, minorities, recent immigrants, I knew they were all more likely to get stuck in jobs and be what's called underemployed. But I wanted to see how they felt about that, the steps they took to get out of that, and why they didn't get out of that, what their friends did, their networks, all of that. So I kind of took that approach to see how they felt about it, what they did, to add to those stats and stuff. So building on that, feminist theorists were very interested in looking at how girls and women were treated in schools. Again, we talked before in the socialization week, I believe, that the classroom, in part due to its original or kind of masculinist orientation, if you look on just media articles, you'll see a lot of things about not necessarily classrooms so much, but workplaces as being highly masculinized and male-centered because public work was mostly designed for men when women were stuck in the home. But sociologists argue that due to the correspondence between the work world and the educational system, that this applies there as well. So things like, even things like sexual harassment, mostly happening to women on campuses, women dropping out of school more often at the higher levels. There have been many strides made, and women are increasingly doing better and better in schools and being more represented. But that historical legacy of their exclusion in schools is still around. And there are surely still many teachers and professors who, deliberately or not, do happen to favor male students. And so that's a reality that many people face. So classic work, again, was really focused on, remember, people like Dorothy Smith writing in like 50s, 60s, 70s. They were really interested in saying, okay, we need to look at the female experience because we've mostly been focused on men because they were the ones being educated, they were the ones working, but now, or formally working and formally educated, but now as women are growing in this, we've identified that there's a gender issue here, and then now going forward, we're going to keep looking at, even though how progress has happened, this legacy still matters. So for example, some examples here. So still in the contemporary time, boys report having more interactions with their teachers. You see some things have happened. Sexism is not as blatant in course textbooks. So, you know, there are more depictions. Images in textbooks are very important. So if you look historically, you'll see the way men and women were depicted was extremely different in the past, again, with women being, you know, presented in a kind of hyper-feminine way, doing domestic things, more around beauty things. Now, women are often, you know, when they show pictures of accountants and business people, they'll often show, you know, pictures of women in pantsuits and things to show that, you know, women can do this as well. So sexism is going down in textbooks. That's a big thing, but it still is prevalent. The depictions of women still are often sexualized, and women are objectified more than men. So, you know, again, that links to wider gender norms. Men historically, you know, in images have not been sexualized. Instead, images of them and ideas about them have more been centered on, you know, them being powerful, them being smart, financially responsible, all of those things that characterize males, the ideals of males. But for women, historically, it's been more focused on, okay, how pretty are they? How empathic are they? How nice are they? You know, how amenable are they? Malleable, childlike, all of those things. So the extent to which what you're taught in school reinforces that, even in textbooks, again, is something sociologists look at. We see that with, I believe it's one of my next slides, we see that with race as well. So feminist studies, so those are the broad theories. Feminists, again, we look at how education has functions, we critique those, then we see how the process happens, and then feminist theory really opens up our eyes to seeing, okay, these statistical trends we see, let's just take the case of gender, we see differences in income, the gender wage gap between men and women, differences in self-esteem, differences in all these things, and we say, okay, education itself plays a key role in some instances narrowing these gaps, but also sometimes unintentionally perhaps widening the gaps. So more contemporary work again, and stats, again, you always have to, things are, you know, good and bad. More women than ever are pursuing undergrad education. There's now, you know, there's been a male, you'll see in the media too, there's lots of outcry about men becoming less and less educated, like even within their own gender, so less men going to school than in the past, and way more women going. There are more women in undergrad, more women in health sciences, pharmacy, med school, law, more and more women are entering. So it's again, we're in a very interesting time. That still doesn't translate into women making more, so that's interesting that more and more women are going, but men are still making more overall. But this increase, again, was sparked by things like the women's movement, and those early feminist gender theorists and advocates in the real world, bra burning, suffragette movements throughout, you know, in the 20s or early 10s, all these things happening. So women now are increasingly in post-secondary school. The majority of sociology students, for sure, in almost all my classes, are women as well, and we're seeing that more and more. Oh, I see people looking around now, gendering the classroom. So that's marked actually by statistics. So females do tend to be predominantly in the humanities and social sciences, increasingly in the life sciences though. I think the stats are changing now. So there, you know, they don't have life sciences, but in the physical sciences, so things, I guess you would think like physics and engineering, it's much, much more male than female, oftentimes 3-to-1, even 4-to-1 ratio. But life sciences now, so bio, I think for sure across Canada, and again, health sciences, definitely nursing, medicine, law, veterinary, those, I think veterinary, I'm not sure. But most of those now are female dominated. And again, you can kind of think of the norms that go along with that, right? So just right off the bat, looking at science, what do you think of when you hear that women are more likely to be in life sciences and men are more likely to be in physical sciences? Any thoughts on that? What do you think about that? Why do you think that is? Don't be afraid. Yep.
I'm just guessing, but masculinity and like male kind of way of thinking requires logic, stereotypically speaking, and females are more compassionate and like more like emotionally like nurturing in a sense. So that's probably the reason why it's like that.
Right, well, so think of the stereotypes about people involved in health professions, for example, and those in, and those in, like, think of engineers. So this is interesting because you see how norms evolve, right? So 100 years ago, 50 years ago, you know, you would think of a woman doctor that's a lady doctor and that's unusual that she's doing that. Now it's very common and you think, okay, doctors, like women are very smart and men are, like, everyone's smart and capable. But yeah, you could think with the norms around empathy, compassion, motherhood, that it would make sense in terms of those stereotypes that women would enter medicine and the legal profession, you know, people wanting to counsel others. So even though women have made strides, there still is this link towards more empathic roles. And interestingly, again, redefining those roles around empathy once they become female-dominated. Because the whole thing of, you know, think of things like ratemymd.com and ratemyprof and all of that. Don't go in there and troll me. Those things, you know, so many of the soft skills that you need in these jobs have been feminized, and you know, sometimes you have to ask yourself, oh, are these becoming more empathy based now that there's more women involved? My sister's a pharmacist and she thinks about that a lot. When you think of pharmacy in the past, when it was men, it was kind of like, okay, you're this professional there, and people defer to you. Now that it's female dominated, you know, she's often, like, people at the pharmacy will say, like, hey girl, get me my pills and stuff, like literally. And she's like, you know, I went to university for 8 years to do this and I'm not always treated very well. But I'm being filmed, so my sister loves her job. So I'm not, I don't want her, she's not complaining. It's anonymous. So I shouldn't have said that. But so anyway, no, it's fine. She's, you know, she loves it. And, but certain people, you know, these interactions happen. She manages it well. So females, again, remain more concentrated in the commonality, again, emphasize femininity and masculinity, or hegemonic masculinity. Men and women tend to select themselves more likely into jobs that fit the stereotypes they were taught. So again, the physical sciences are seen as much more rational, logical, abstract, and removed from the real world, even like either highly practical or very like cerebral and removed. Whereas again, women, because of the motherhood idea and femininity ideas, they're seen as doing, you know, more relational things, social things. So things like the chilly climate, again, when you're a minority and when you find yourself the minority in a situation, you may experience what's called a chilly climate. This term is specific for, according to the textbook, it's specific for the kind of, or it was designed around the experiences of women in school, but I do think it translates to other minority individuals' experiences as well. But this is the idea that, you know in a situation, like with the double consciousness, remember Du Bois's idea, You know, when you kind of have a unconscious sense in a situation that you're not welcome. And it's not just unconscious in your head, it may be, you know, people being cold to you. That's where it came from. You know, when you say someone's cold to you, they're not really answering you in full sentences, they're being abrasive, they're not giving you the time of day. This historically, again, was how women were treated in higher education. And then statistically too, one interesting example to show the negative effects of kind of the, the not so great impacts and facts about education regarding women. So 84% of elementary school teachers are women. So just to explain this, because it might sound a bit confusing. 84% of elementary school teachers are women, and 59% of high school teachers are women. So let's just say 85 and 60. But of those elementary school teachers, only 53% of women are principals. So that's higher than men, but remember, 85% of elementary school teachers, so let's say, you know, 6 out of 7 or whatever elementary school teachers are women, but only 1 out of 2 principals are women in those schools. So that means men are being promoted to principal more, relative, right? So you have, you know, 5 times as many women, but then you have the same amount of principals. The same amount of men and women principals. So 1 in 5 get promoted, and then almost every guy gets promoted, it seems, right? And then the same issue in high school, where it's double the amount. Like those numbers should be even, is the long point of what I'm saying. If it was operating totally normally, you would say, okay, 5 out of 6 teachers are women, 5 out of 6 principals are women. But instead it's 5 out of 6, and then half. So what's happening to those other women? They're never being promoted. That tends to be the common trend right now in terms of when you think of the gender wage gap. I mentioned it before, but think of Fortune 500 companies, top companies performing well. Very few of them have female, what are called C-suite executive types, and very few CEOs. So women, that's the glass ceiling that we talked about before in the Gender Week. Women often still face resistance climbing the kind of corporate ladder. So again, all of this to say, it's one thing to give people the same opportunities, but then it's another to say that, okay, is this opportunity actually going to translate into real opportunities in the real world? Because I can give you all this education, but then if people are still sexist in the workplace, you know, this might help you, and you can, again, think about things and think of Lawrence at the front telling you about this, but how can you use this in that environment? So, and so again, in terms of hierarchy, looking at professors, when you look, women and men on the left and right, there are less women at every level, but the same trend happens. So women are most likely to be, or women and men are most equal at the level of assistant, then it drops at associate, and then it's only a quarter of full. So what these things mean, I know in first year you may not know this, I didn't know this till later in university, but these are ranks of professors. So I think technically right now again, it's, you know, things change all the time, categories. I'm a graduate student, but I'm also a 1-year term assistant professor, I think. So I'm that top one. And then if I got hired full-time and like I published and people like me, whatever, then I could be an associate and then a full professor. They're like the big names you see, kind of the big bobbleheads around campus. No, I'm not. Yeah, so they're the big names, you know, when you think of Northrop Frye and things named after people. So very few women, relative men, increasing over time, but again, not at the pace that it should, given the rates of education. So we're almost done. So the informal aspect of education, Pierre Bourdieu was a French sociologist. His famous book, 1984, Distinction was his book, a big 500-page tome. He did a quantitative study but a lot of theoretical analysis. He was a French individual, and France of his time was very, very class divided. It still is relative to a lot of other places. But he was interested in how elites kind of maintain their elite status And he said one way that they do this is through informal socialization. He said cultural capital is all the skills, habits, mannerisms, and things that help ensure not only that you succeed, but if you don't have them or you have other capital, this is abstract, so I'll give examples. If you have different capital, that signals you're not the right one for the job. So an example of that, cultural capital could be knowing not to talk in lecture. So let's say a professor is really evaluating students informally and thinking of research positions or whatever. Let's say in a smaller seminar, not one like this. Let's say you're in a 15-person class and you've been in a lot of classes. Maybe you have a professor as a parent. You would know that professors kind of would think you're more engaged and give you more of a benefit of the doubt if you came to class having done the readings, you come with questions, you ask them about their research, you show an interest in the field. Those are kind of intangible mannerisms and ways of acting that someone who has never been in a class like that or doesn't know anyone that's been in a class like that, they don't have the capital, they don't know to do that. So they may come without doing the readings. They may think that asking questions is rude. So I know a lot of students think that, so that's why I say ask me questions. They may think, like, oh, my question doesn't make sense or whatever. They don't have the confidence. So cultural capital is, again, the things you kind of need to do aside from the formal skills to signal that you're the right person for whatever it is you're trying to fit into. Even with my gaming community, right? There was cultural capital there, where someone new would come in and they wouldn't just their whole way of talking about games wouldn't be right. They wouldn't be seen as being serious because they weren't using the right lingo. They weren't going on the right websites. They didn't know the forums we were all chatting on. That signaled to us that they were outsiders, right? So we do that all the time. In the culture week when we talked about subculture, right, there are ways of acting. And in terms of education, again, you may not think of, privileged people as being in a subculture or people, with parents that went to good universities and things as being part of a subculture. But they do share these ways of kind of knowing how to interact and knowing, even knowing what kind of resume you should make, knowing what kind of program is in demand, all of those things. Those are things that not everyone knows. And so post-structural theory fits into this as well. We're almost done with the theories of, again, so if you start looking at the idea of cultural capital and you say, you know what, the fact that, and this is where things get really hard, right? Because you say, okay, even if the education system's perfect, people who know more about it are going to do better than those who don't. And how do you force people to know like how to act in classrooms, how to choose majors that are in demand? You can't do that. That's based on how they were raised. That's based on the friends they have. That's based on their interests. Post-structuralists say, well, this exposes a really negative aspect of education. And so they put power key in this. And they say, actually, the content of what people are taught, the attitudes we're valuing, these can be highly racist, these can be highly elitist. They look at, I mentioned before, in textbooks, people, women are highly sexualized. Historically, there's been much lower representation of minority and racial minorities in textbooks. So more subtle things are happening. So in school, it's often, okay, you're taught to be very deferential to authority. Often education is critiqued for people feeling they have to memorize a lot of things, almost take for granted what professors and teachers are teaching them, not use their own opinion, all of those things. So those sorts of reactions, post-structuralists say, well, that's actually part of a deeper problem. Because linked to conflict theorists, there are historical elites that are trying to prevent you from thinking differently. So when people critique the university on that level, they're often drawing on, implicitly or explicitly, on people like Foucault, who said, well, remember Gramsci and his idea of hegemony. the rich don't just stay rich and elites don't just stay elite by like forcing people and dominating people to do things, but there's more subtle strategies of doing that. So making programs that, you know, in management, for example, not having a whole ton of entrepreneur classes or a whole ton of classes on race and gender and more just on like how to operate in business. They wouldn't, you know, they don't want a bunch of radicals coming out. So again, different perspectives, but it all depends on what your research question is about education or like any other topic. Let me see what I have left. Okay, so I'm almost done. I'll do the study buddy activity number 2 after I show the videos, because I'm going to show the videos right on time. Because I want, and then you can decide whether you want to do it. Okay, so last real slides before we go. They're quick at this point. So we'll discuss this and then show the videos and then have the study buddy activity for those who stick around. And I'm now posting all those things on the slides so that you can do them, because I realize a lot of people do use the web option or leave early. Or leave at 4, which is fine. You can just think through them on your own as you're studying. So post-secondary institutions, you know, there are a lot of issues going on here as well. So faculty members, again, I can kind of uniquely speak to this. I am a graduate student, but I've taught, I guess as of this term, I've taught 20 courses, and I've been a teaching assistant over 40 times. Like I've done a lot of that kind of, they call service work when you're a professor. So faculty members have gone down. There are more graduate students teaching courses. Funding is a major issue. At the same time, though, enrollments are going up. Students are paying more. You know, I was part of or impacted by strikes, both when I was an undergrad student and almost twice in graduate school. It was actually really nerve-wracking. I was a teaching, I did too many at one time, but in my second year of my PhD, I was a teaching assistant for 5 courses at once, if you can believe it. So I was doing like a full course load, but of like grading. But it's still easier, right? Whenever my peers would complain, I'm like, well, at least we don't have to hand in the assignments, right? We're just grading. But anyway, so the strike happened while I was doing that. And they're like, no, you can't do that, whatever. And I'm like, ugh. I don't want to cross the picket lines and like go against my union, but all these things are going to pile up. Students are submitting things. So anyway, I had like 1,200 things to grade in like 2 weeks, and I'm like, what am I doing? So anyway, that's one example of these strange situations that happen when staff numbers go down, enrollments go up. There's so many students, and so you'll hear, you know, on both sides, long-winded way of saying on both sides there are issues with higher education. What the heck? Oops. Oh, everything's going haywire. Sorry. Oops. So this is part of the idea of McDonaldization. So as funds go down, as the relevance of education becomes questioned more, what's been happening is that education has been treated more like a privatized enterprise or commodity. So the word McDonaldization really means when something becomes very streamlined and based on efficiencies and based on consumer demand. So coming obviously from the restaurant McDonald's, which is revered by management and business people for being highly efficient, having strong procedures, and having a high return on investment for investors. So universities have been increasingly falling under this umbrella term as well. So students now are increasingly, and again, I'm empowering you to realize through things like Rate My Professor, through things like the registrar's office. So don't tell people I'm telling you to do these things, because then they're going to say, what the hell are you doing in this classroom? You're freaking ruining us, or ruining it for professors. But But from the professor point of view and, you know, the funders and everything, you guys have a lot of power because you're paying for this institution to exist, right? So you're consumers now. You're learning at the, I mean, it's such a weird situation we're in because you feel I have to go here to get a job and get these credentials. But then at the same time, really, you know, we're all working for you here. So it's again, it's a sociologically, it's a fascinating relationship where, you know, even 30 years ago, it would be very different. You know, you couldn't email professors that were much more formal. Many of them, it's like, okay, well, you don't like me, you know, sour grapes. You just, whatever, I'm the prof, you defer to me. Now it's very different. Some professors still act that way, I'm sure, but decreasingly, because now, you know, we're encouraged to, for many good reasons, to be more human and relatable with students. But the darker side of that is because, you know, universities need high enrollments, and that becomes a problem. Programs become created just to inflate the campus, and then that feeds into credentialization. I'm not saying any particular program specifically, but that is a common criticism. Like new programs coming up, is it for money? Is it for education? These are questions that, again, historically are very new. And so we see this in, you know, large classes. Increasingly, classes are becoming much bigger. Small seminar-like classes are decreasing. Again, there have been some initiatives to change that, but even when those are changed, those often coincide with higher tuition rates. So class sizes might go down, but then you may be paying more tuition for that. So it's still, you know, very consumeristic. So we'll skip this for now, but this is something you can do at home. So, you know, think through this. You know, I may be introducing this to you for the first time, to the horror of my colleagues, but I'm pretty sure we all kind of know this. You know, so think, if you, okay, let's say, you know, this isn't AC223. Let's say you're in the Apple store, you know, this is what this is. So you're in the Apple store and you're a customer. You know, think of these things. What do you, and again, you'll have these with your, this will be the first time for the vast majority of you doing, oh no, wait, you all did, oh, okay, no, you're experts. I always forget, because you guys did teaching evaluations for half your courses, right? So you already know what this looks like. But when you do teaching evaluations, you know, you think they're really trying to get at these things. What do you expect out of your university education? So, you know, if you say about the prof, like, give them 1 on everything, and then say, you know, total troll, hates me, just talks from slides, can't speak, FML, whatever. If you say all that, then the administrators that read that in the chairs will be like, you know, like, if profs keep acting like this, our enrollments are going to go down, we're going to have less money, and that means we can take less vacations. No, that means then we can't build nice infrastructure and learning communities and things. You know, but they don't want that. And then so what do you expect from professors? Those are things we're asking. What do you expect from peers? So what things work? And then overall, how have they don't really ask this, because whatever, but why I'm more interested in this, you know, as something to think about as you go through university, how have your expectations changed over time? Did you maybe come in thinking like, oh, this is going to be very cold, but then you have a lot of awesome classes and you make a lot of lifelong study buddies and it gets very warm? Or, you know, 3 years down the road, did you say, you know, making a study buddy was the worst thing I ever did in my life because it made me expect that I developed them in other classes, but only Lawrence is cool enough to have that idea, and now I'm expecting study buddies everywhere I go, but I only have that one study buddy from Sociology. So that could happen too. Okay, so think of that at home. Now, for those of you that really are my, you know, whatever, those special students, I mean, in the best way possible. I'm now going to show you, so first, I'm sorry, I'm so excited, I'm overdoing it. Do you have any questions about that? Because we'll be resuming, but I just want to make sure we get to this while the class is still big. Okay. So I'm going to show you the 2 videos that I made. So I showed a little sneak peek to the class last week. I have the first official study video done, which is from the first 2 weeks of class, put into a 3-minute video. And before, I'll show you the introduction. So it's me talking, and I bought this really cool app because I care about you guys. See, so I bought this really cool app that lets me make these like drawing videos. So this is an introduction to what their intention is and how, you know, again, just to humanize and personalize this experience and, you know, give me another brandable skill or whatever. Okay.
Meet Rob. Rob is a student at UTSC. When he initially enrolled, he had high expectations for how he would perform. The first 3 weeks were full of awesome lectures, and Rob was a happy guy. He stayed that way for a while, but over time, something changed. Although Rob was still doing well in his courses, he wasn't improving as much as he hoped. No matter what he did, it seemed like he couldn't improve his grades as much as he wanted to. Rob was bummed out because many of his peers didn't seem to be having the same problem. In fact, they often trolled him when they encountered him in the hallways of AC, bragging about how easy school was for them. At first, Rob struggled to figure out how to study more effectively, until he heard about Lawrence's awesome study videos. So he went to a Sociology lecture, and it was there that he learned about Lawrence's awesome study videos. It was a comprehensive study strategy, moreover from management, can you believe it, which advocated for students teaching, tailoring, and taking control of their course material, and ultimately their university experience. Approaching the material this way enabled Rob to place course material within a wider context. This made remembering what he learned easier. The tailored aspect of the strategy worked similarly. This was not a one-size-fits-all method, but one based around the fact that Rob is a unique individual taking a unique combination of courses. And the method emphasizes taking control of one's own learning. So Rob now felt like he was in control of his academic destiny, building study plans and habits that were his. Rob liked the thought of this, but what he enjoyed hearing even more was that Lawrence's study videos were directly related to Sociology. After creating videos, Lawrence would poll the class on what they found effective. This ensured that the videos were being digested and weren't just there to make Lawrence feel good about himself. This ultimately made Rob feel good about himself. Because Lawrence was such a fun and interesting person, Rob thought it was worth a shot. Fast forward to a year later. Today, Rob's university journey is doing just great. He no longer worries that his peers are outperforming him. Instead, he's pretty sure he's awesome and winning this whole academic thing. Troll the more. And with higher grades, more time, and greater peace of mind, Rob's feeling really happy again. Be like Rob. Keep attending lectures and visiting our campus site to see updates.
Oh, thanks. But if you like that, okay, now, oh my God, the PS, that took me like 20 hours to make. That's when I came in saying I'm unskilled. But thank you. And I will do the poll afterwards. I have that open too. But so now we get into the first one. So it's all well and good, just like the translation of whatever, skills. It's all well and good for me to say I'm going to do that. That was easy. Now I tried to make my first content one. So this, okay, you'll see it's the same idea. But so this is supposed to be a snapshot of what we learned in the first couple of weeks. So I want your feedback afterwards on other things I can include or not include or whatever. So again, this is supposed to be the idea of this when I was studying, you know, teaching perception and whatever. I think people remember images and discrepant things more than like very direct things. And it's also more fun to make, obviously, and more likely that I'll become a YouTube influencer with this stuff than if I just say, you know, boring things. So anyway.
What is sociology? Ultimately, it's the study of society. This means it's about all of us. The things we do, the places we live, and the kinds of people that we become. Sociology is inherently interdisciplinary. It draws on the social sciences, the humanities, and the sciences in its efforts to understand human behavior. While it is indeed a distinct field of study, these influences on the discipline can be seen in sociologists' interest in politics, demography, history, meaning-making, psychology, individual development, and many other topics. Through methods such as in-depth interviews and a collection of quantitatively analyzing surveys, sociologists seek to describe the world around them, explain why particular things are the way that they are, make generalizations to apply their findings from specific cases on wider populations, and ultimately predict human behavior. However, sociologists do realize that humans are complex. Therefore, prediction can never be perfect. Instead, sociologists try to develop falsifiable claims about the social world in an attempt to approximate a closer understanding of just what makes us tick the way we, well, tick. By studying sociology, you can come to see things that appear familiar and normal to you as actually quite strange. The things that you take for granted rely on passing down norms, beliefs, and traditions, but often they just appear as how things are. By learning how much of what you take for granted is actually socially constructed, that is the residue of other people's behavior, you become empowered to imagine how the world could be different. How your actions become a structure not only your own future experiences, but other people's experiences for generations to come. Keep imagining. Until next time.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. So hopefully, like I'm going to do my little poll. Oh. I'm going to set this up. How do I even do this? Oh, right. Okay, so this will be fun little Q&A. Because the thing, I like making these, so it's fun. But I can make them however. Again, we're in a special situation. The world is our oyster. Okay. So here's our little poll. Oh, I was supposed to ask that earlier. Okay, so this is open-ended. So wait, let me see. I believe I have it open-ended with speech bubbles. So as you write, I think I filtered profanities, but I don't know. But as you write, little pop-ups will come up. So whatever you think, you can disregard my feelings. I want to know how effective they are. Again, I've only made those two, and I'm open to whatever. So anything, yay! Okay, good. So I like to think I'm funny. People tell me I should be a stand-up comedian. And I tell them, I'm like, no, I'm smart. But no, I love stand-up comedians. Yeah, so if they're helpful, so I can make them more like whatever, I don't know. I died, but in a good way. Oh, good. Like my person that fell off the escalator. I doubted your meme powers before, but now I believe you know Padawan. Okay, good. See, because I know memes. I don't use them in my slides because that's people are complex. I like to think I'm like a serious person, but that's more my weird humor. Okay, good. Oh, this makes me happy. Okay, good. Could be slightly slower. Okay, yeah. So the issue is, so I tried to slow it afterwards, but then everything sounded all warped. So I know I have a tendency to talk really fast, so I have to, yeah. I'm making the new one, and I have the pictures, and but I don't know what they are yet. Oh, good. When you actually listen, it's good. The babies look creepy, but that's what, oh my God, you have no idea how creepy they can look. So, yeah, I'm really, yeah. Oh, good. But see, everything's double-sided. So as I said, you know, well, I wasn't lying when I had the thing called Lawrence's Narcissistic Holiday Lottery. I want to be famous on YouTube with this. So, you know, imagine, and then you'll be part of this story. You'll be the first one ever. And I may not be a prof again, so I'm like, I want as much of this as I can. Again, I told you, I use this university a lot. I've been in this damn university for 11 years. So I am using this. So I'm like, no, profs aren't doing this. What the hell? And this was software, actually, so it's called Doodly. You can pick the hands that you want. This is made for marketers. So all those people that like make YouTube ads, that's what they use. But you can do this. It's really easy. I don't know anything of what I'm doing. But people that use it usually use like all like the serious pictures. But if you type things like Christmas and Halloween, there's all these like really weird pictures that I've never seen anyone use. So there's a lot of other babies and like monsters and things that'll be making their way into SOCIO03. Yeah, so, okay, good. So I like, yeah. Okay, so, yeah, League of Legends. Okay, good. And summer can be, okay, so I'm going to try to perfect them. So good. Mayo, yes, exactly. Okay. And then fun. What would you bring to a desert island? Phone, canned goods. My memories of social. So this comes from my own. Me and my partner, we've been binge watching every like survival show. So it started with watching all 37 seasons of Survivor in 8 months. Then now we're watching Alone and Naked and Afraid. As a sociologist, I can tell you those shows are like so interesting to watch because you see how people act when like all the BS is like gone and they're like there. And some people become really nice, some become really nasty. It's funny. They're funny to watch. Gender roles amplify, all these things.
Like, that's like a crime. Like, why do you think that's suffer?
Okay. So I'm tapping into your minds. This is my process of making these videos. I want to see. I want to know what ticks. Okay, so I'll leave that up for now. So in terms of next week, so just think, you know, again, the whole point of bringing this to higher education, just think broadly, you know, what are the advantages and disadvantages? Always when you think of anything, being critical is thinking what are the pros and cons of any given thing I'm learning and any given thing I'm doing, how can things be different? Remember, the sociological imagination really is saying, okay, this is what's presented to me, but what other impacts does this have? What might this have in the long run? How might this change? These are all things, you know, that I think this works in. Corporatization I didn't talk super much about, but that was really, again, this idea of, you know, things change. So the university, I mean, again, we're in such a, you know, a funny time. For the first time in history, right, you have, like, profs making doodle videos and being, you know, crossing boundaries. I actually got the idea of doing this in a course I taught where a whole bunch, it was on careers, and a whole bunch of students were telling me they wanted to be YouTube stars. And I'm like, you know what? Like, I kept thinking I can't do that because I have no skills. But then I'm like, you know, this is an untapped market. Nobody's done this. I'm going to do it. And then it's fun, right? So, and it's easy. So, yeah, the world, things are, and that's the thing, you know, I always think, I have such a fear of missing out. I'm always choosing the wrong thing. I chose video gaming 10 years before it was big. I chose university. As people, it's becoming irrelevant. What am I doing? So now I'm like, I'm gonna blend it. But anyway, so corporatization, that's part of it. Having personal brands, having Rate My Professor. But it's also cool because now I'm starting to think, you know, how can I do things like, obviously your learning is still at the forefront of this, but at the same time I can help myself with this and have fun. So it's things like that are interesting. When I went to teaching workshops, they always encourage us to do that, particularly ones that don't have like full-time positions, because I still do have to apply for work myself, and you know, hopefully, you know, I can frame this as interactive pedagogy technique, but I'm also like having fun with it. So before we go, so the assignment 3 guidelines, so I'm going to just make them live right now, so if you can just let me know if that works. So let's see how our little friend's doing. Okay, good. Yeah, that makes sense. I wouldn't bring canned goods because you don't have a can opener. Well, you could smash it on a rock, I guess, but then you might get lead poisoning or something. I don't know. I guess, yeah. I'd have to think.
I think you're probably useless things that probably like.
Yeah, there's no charger. So, but if you're that glued to your phone, it might just be psychologically helpful. Having it even dead with you, right? So, those 3 hours could be, you could milk it over time, right?
I guess you could like call for help.
Yeah, well that's why you could call right away. So, anyway, I don't know what I'd bring.
I think the tweet is great.
Okay, so assignment number 3, I'm going to make everything live. So if, if you can just tell me if these pop up. Is anyone on Quarkus? Can they see assignment number 3 now? Anyway, just let me know if you can't in the future. It should be. Anyone yet? Okay, good. It's there. All right, perfect. So we'll be covering this more next week, but if you want to get started, because again, you know, the thing of this class, you're studying by doing Revel. I'm going to make an announcement. I was waiting for the test dates to be given to me, but if I don't hear by the end of tomorrow, I'm going to make an announcement tomorrow night about the test 1 review session. So I will likely hold the test 1 review this Friday. I'll come in myself because my TAs are busy. I might come in on Friday and be there all day. Like I'll have a lunch break or whatever, but I might come in. And again, you know, you do things for yourself because I'm like, ooh, he's coming in on Friday. Actually, my partner's in Scotland for the whole week and I'm kind of lonely. So I'm going to come on Friday. And then I'll probably do like, I might not come on Friday, but it'll be this Friday or next Friday. And then I might go from like 10 to 12 and then like 1 to 3. And I'll have the rubrics with me, the grading keys, and then, you know, I can show you the test and you can react to it with me and I can give you tips and tell you about answers and all of that. So I'm happy to do that. Okay, so assignment number 3, instructions. We got our ethical approval. So I'm not going to read all of this. The long and short of this, you can read the instructions. Don't be scared by the word count. It's up to 2,000 words, but that's because you're going to be saying, you're going to be providing interview questions that you ask your respondents and all of that. The reason I have so many tutorials devoted to this is because this is quite different than anything you've done in university or maybe ever so far. I'm indoctrinating you to do the kind of work that I do. So the instructions are long. There's a lot of things to read through, but it's simple. There's just a lot of procedural things you have to do. So the first thing to think through, I'll go into the details next week of the mechanics of it, and your TAs will cover that in tutorials this week. But the long and short of it is you have to pick one research topic. So the first topic is educational decisions, the second topic is religion, and the third is role conflict. Then within those, you have to ask people questions based on the research question that I've given you. So for educational decisions, and this is not what you'll be asking people. We'll go through what interview questions are. These are research questions. You don't ask people research questions. So my research question is, you know, why do people in low-wage jobs sometimes get stuck in their jobs? I don't ask someone who's working a low-wage job, you know, why are you stuck at working at McDonald's or whatever? No, I'm like, how did you find yourself here? Or what were you aspiring to at age 16? Or what's your education like? And I piece it together over like 3 hours. You're going to do that over 20 minutes, but the whole idea is, you know, and this is like a life skill too. You don't always ask people things directly when you want to know. You kind of skirt around it, or else they'll like kind of they'll give you a performance instead, or be like traumatized by you. So the research question is, how do people make decisions about post-secondary education? This week in tutorials, you'll be generating questions, but here's an example one. So how did you decide whether or not to attend university? And then once they answer that, or if they just say, I don't know, parents, then you say, well, what role did your family have in making that? I don't know, parents. Then you say, look, what do you mean? I don't know. No, you say, okay, like, what did they do? Did they tell you? Were you following them? Some people will keep giving responses like that. Try not to interview people that you think will be like that. I learned that the hard way when I had people like, oh, you're giving me 20 bucks? Okay, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and then I'm gone. Older people tend to be more talkative, particularly people interested in like your education. So if you talk, like a grandparent would be fantastic, like having two people of different ages. Yeah, like I would recommend older, just because, like senior, even just of my interviews, they're the most willing to talk usually, but everyone's different. Just so go to someone that you think will be candid and open. So the first one, again, the research question: how do people make decisions about post-secondary education? Then that sort of question. Or you could do religion. What role does religion play in people's lives? So again, these things, it depends on who you know, right? So if you know someone religious that's really interesting, maybe you'll want to do that. If you know two people. Like let's say you know like a Christian fundamentalist and an atheist. That could be really cool to do the religion topic and then say, you know, ask them how it's a part of your life. For atheists, obviously it's not. But you would say, like, what benefits do you feel from not practicing a religion? What prompted you to become atheist? Like, did you have turning points in your lives? Did you attend Catholic school or whatever? These are things, you know. I have to validate the questions first. But all of those ones I'm saying are kind of appropriate. So in tutorials this week and then the next one, you're going to be coming up with lists of other questions for these topics. And then I just have to okay them because, again, I'm saying I'm being dramatic with the trauma thing, but the ethics, it's actually like you can't offend people and say no one's going to make lists like that, but you can't say like discriminatory things and ask bad questions and stuff, like ones that'll psychologically harm people. So I do have to have a final say on what you can ask. So I will make the list of questions you can ask. So again, this assignment, it's going to be fairly direct compared to the first and second assignment. But the choice of yours is the topics within these three. And again, I would let you do more of whatever you want, but there's ethics. So I had to apply to the board, I got approval, and on the condition that I approve all the questions. Again, U of T, as the consumer thing, U of T could get sued if you were to like start asking people all these questions and say, you know, I'm an ambassador of U of T, and I want to know like why you're such an idiot. Then that would, oh my God, so, you know. So role conflict. How do university students manage role conflict? And that could be good too. If you have peers, join a club, go to the SOCI thing, ask the SOCI president, how do you manage the conflict of like managing this organization and at the same time being like an A student or whatever, and then they'll open up and everything. So again, read through this, think about them, and then for test 2, if you want to start studying, so I've compiled, which I'll show next week, I've compiled, based on feedback from the midterm, 20 questions of varying difficulty, practice questions that we'll go through in class next week. And for now, just remember, you know, I would think back on the kinds of questions that were asked in the test 1. I know that's a far away time, but really focused on application, and in terms of studying, think, okay, how do functionalism, conflict theory, symbolic interactionism, feminist theory, post-structuralist theory, how do they apply to each of like the substantive topics? And just think, you know, the way to do that, I would say, think like, how would a sociologist view gender? How would they view sexualities? How do they view inequality? How do they view education? And then try to go to my slides, and what I have there are like the key points that I think are important. Go back to lecture videos, you know, and notes you took. I am going to post on the YouTube channel also all of semester 1's videos before the final exam, because I have them now in a USB. I can't do that with semester 2's, so I'll batch upload the first 10 lectures before the final exam once I can, once I'm allowed to. But the second term I won't. I won't upload them before test 2 because I just don't want to confuse you thinking you need to know a whole bunch of that, although you do need the weeks after test 1, so I might upload those. Okay, and so the one last thing, just remember that the format is up here, the page requirements, the penalties, what it's out of, and then importantly, the one new thing, the informed consent form. So you absolutely need to do the informed consent. So there's instructions on what you do. You have to print out some copies, give them to your respondents, scan one and submit it with your assignment. Again, I don't want to force you to do this, but we can't grade it without that because we would be liable otherwise. So again, this is all scary, like administrative stuff, but you know, just ask a series of questions that I've provided you with, have fun in the interviews, and then really, you know, rigorously try to analyze it and see, okay, what these people told me, how does this feed back into what I've learned? And there's a lot of instructions on how to do that. So you're basically doing a qualitative analysis on this. Yep.
Record the interviews this year or not?
No.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. So, and Sarah did this assignment herself, so I'll have her at some point come up and, maybe next week give some tips on how to succeed. Again, it's very early right now. I don't want to inundate you with this, but have a look at it, and I want everyone to do well. The TAs are happy to do this. We've all done interviews with people. It's very scary the first time, so again, I highly recommend picking people that you know well. I had to they were like, okay, find a site and find people. So I remember one of my friends, they went to the Tim Hortons at Dufferin Mall, inside the mall, and then they were basically harassing people, trying to get them to talk to them. So that didn't really go over very well. So don't do, you can, I would recommend family and friends, but if there's someone, if there's someone you really wanted to go on a date with or something, you can, and you're a little bit shy, you can say, oh, I have this interview thing. So I don't know, but you use it strategically if you want, right? So I mean, you could, yeah. Anyway, so I'd recommend a friend or loved one. It's just easier, but you can do someone else as well. Okay, so do the Revel quizzes for this week, and I will. So I will for this week or next week, and then I will see you a week from today.